The war did not begin with bombs falling from the sky. It began with numbers, endless numbers, trajectories, distances, speeds, angles, time delays, wind resistance, fuel consumption, radar echoes, intercepted messages, encoded text. Before a single shot was fired, World War II created a problem no army had ever faced before. The modern battlefield was producing information faster than the human mind could process it, and every delay meant men died. At the start of World War II, there were no electronic computers as we understand them today. There were no screens, no keyboards, no digital memory. Yet every major military decision depended on calculations. Artillery crews needed firing tables to know how far a shell would travel based on barrel wear, temperature, humidity, elevation, and wind. Naval guns needed constant recalculations as ships moved, rolled, and turned. Bombers, flying at high altitude, needed precise timing and angles to hit targets they could barely see. Radar systems, still new and unreliable, produced raw data that had to be interpreted immediately. Intelligence units intercepted enemy communications by the thousands, each message useless unless decoded in time. All of this math was originally done by people. They were called computers, not machines but humans. Entire rooms filled with men and women sitting at desks, calculating equations by hand or with mechanical calculators. A single artillery firing table could take weeks to complete. By the time it was finished, the conditions it was based on were often already outdated. New weapons made the problem worse. Faster aircraft, longer range guns, and more complex munitions increased the number of variables. The war was accelerating, but human calculation speed was not. This gap between the speed of warfare and the speed of human thinking became deadly. In 1940 and 1941, Allied forces began to realize that they were losing time they could not afford to lose. Artillery shells missed their targets not because crews were poorly trained, but because the math guiding them was outdated or incomplete. Naval battles were decided in seconds, yet calculations lagged behind reality. Bomber losses mounted when targeting errors caused planes to fly predictable paths. Intelligence reports arrived too late to matter. In some cases, decoded enemy messages were read after the battle they warned about had already ended. Commanders demanded faster answers. Scientists and engineers were pushed beyond anything they had attempted before. The question was no longer how to calculate more accurately. The question was how to calculate faster than any human possibly could. And mechanical calculators had existed for decades, but they were slow and fragile. Each operation required physical movement of gears and levers. Multiply enough numbers, and the machine overheated or broke. Even with rows of calculators operating at once, the workload overwhelmed them. The war was producing more data than all existing calculation methods combined could handle. Then came the realization that changed everything. If humans could not calculate fast enough and mechanical devices were too slow, then the calculations themselves had to be automated, not assisted, automated. The process had to run continuously without stopping for fatigue, without waiting for human hands to turn a crank or reset a dial. This idea was radical, dangerous even. No one had ever built a machine that could perform thousands of calculations automatically without human intervention. There was no blueprint, no proven design, only urgency. The first attempts were crude, electromechanical systems that combined electrical switches with mechanical parts. Relays clicked on and off, routing signals through circuits that represented logic. Each relay was slow, but it was faster than a person. More importantly, it never got tired. Engineers discovered that if calculations could be broken down into simple steps and those steps wired into a machine, the machine could repeat them endlessly at high speed. War pressure removed hesitation. Funding was no longer a problem. If an idea might save lives or shorten the war, it was approved. Entire teams were assembled in secrecy. Failure was expected. Speed mattered more than elegance. At the same time, intelligence agencies were drowning in encrypted enemy communications. Messages poured in by the thousands, each one potentially critical, but encryption systems changed frequently, and decoding them by hand was impossibly slow. Some messages took weeks to crack. By then, the information was useless. Submarines had already moved, troops had already marched, ships had already sunk. This created a second crisis. It was not just calculations of physics that needed to be automated, logic itself needed to be mechanized. Patterns had to be detected, tested, and discarded at speeds no human team could achieve. What emerged from this pressure was a new way of thinking about machines, not as tools that assisted humans, but as systems that replaced human mental labor entirely for specific tasks. These machines would not think, they would not understand, but they would process information at a speed that made human effort irrelevant. By 1942, the idea of building specialized calculation machines for war was no longer theoretical. It was a necessity. Laboratories and secret facilities began working day and night. Engineers slept next to their machines. Components burned out constantly. Entire designs were scrapped and rebuilt from scratch. There were no guarantees any of it would work. But the alternative was worse. Without faster calculation, the war would grind on longer, casualties would rise, strategic mistakes would multiply. The cost of delay was measured in lives. World War II did not invent the desire to compute, but it forced humanity to confront a truth it had never faced before. The human mind, no matter how brilliant, was too slow for modern war. And so, under the pressure of global conflict, the world took its first irreversible step toward machine intelligence. Not for curiosity, not for progress, but because war demanded answers faster than humans could give them, and that demand would change the world forever. By the time the war reached its midpoint, the idea of building machines to handle calculation was no longer experimental, it was urgent. What followed was not a single invention, but a quiet explosion of secret machines, each designed to solve one specific wartime problem faster than any human team ever could. These were not computers in the modern sense. They had no screens, no stored programs, no user friendly interfaces. They were purpose built war machines designed under pressure, built in secrecy, and often operated by people who were not allowed to know exactly what they were working on. One of the most critical problems was enemy encryption. German military communications were protected by complex cipher systems that changed frequently. Messages intercepted by radio meant nothing unless they could be decoded quickly. A decoded message that arrived a week late was worthless. In naval warfare, especially against submarines, even a delay of hours could mean the difference between saving a convoy or watching it disappear beneath the ocean. To confront this, engineers began building electromechanical code-breaking machines. These devices used thousands of electrical relays, switches that opened and closed circuits to rapidly test possible encryption settings. Instead of a human trying combinations one by one, the machine could test hundreds or thousands in the time it took a person to test one. The machines were loud, hot, and temperamental. Relays burned out constantly. Wiring errors caused false results. Entire days of work could be lost to a single malfunction. But when they worked, they changed the balance of the war. These machines did not understand language. They searched for patterns. They eliminated impossible solutions. They narrowed chaos into manageable probability. Human operators still made decisions, but the machines did the crushing labor of repetition at speeds no team of people could match. Entire intelligence breakthroughs depended on whether these machines could stay operational long enough to finish their runs. At the same time, another crisis was unfolding across the Atlantic. The United States Army faced an overwhelming demand for artillery firing tables. Every new gun, every new shell type, every battlefield condition required updated calculations. The existing system relied on human computers working around the clock, yet they could not keep up. The backlog grew faster than the tables could be produced. This led to the development of large-scale electronic calculation machines built specifically for ballistics. Unlike earlier mechanical devices, these machines replaced moving gears with electronic components. Vacuum tubes acted as switches, turning calculations into streams of electrical signals. This eliminated many mechanical delays but introduced new problems. Vacuum tubes failed often. Heat buildup caused unpredictable errors. Power consumption was massive. Engineers were forced to invent solutions as they went. Cooling systems were improvised. Faulty components were identified through trial and error. Entire rooms were dedicated to maintenance alone. These machines required constant supervision, yet when running correctly, they could perform in hours what previously took weeks. Crucially, these machines were not general purpose. They could not be easily repurposed. Each one was designed to perform a narrow set of calculations repeatedly and at extreme speed. Changing tasks often meant rewiring large portions of the machine. This was slow, tedious, and prone to mistakes. But even with these limitations, the speed advantage was overwhelming. Another parallel effort focused on fire control systems for ships and aircraft. Naval guns had to account for distance, target speed, wind, ship movement, and the curvature of the Earth. Aircraft gunners faced similar problems, but at far higher speeds. Mechanical analog computers were developed to continuously adjust aiming solutions in real time. These systems did not store numbers. They modeled motion using rotating shafts, gears, and cams. As conditions changed, the machine physically adjusted its outputs. These analog systems saved lives immediately. They allowed gunners to respond dynamically rather than relying on static tables. For the first time, machines were actively participating in combat decisions, even though the operators might not fully understand how the internal mechanisms reached their conclusions. What unified all these efforts was secrecy. Many of the most advanced machines were classified at the highest levels. Operators were told only what they needed to know. Engineers were forbidden from discussing their work, even with colleagues in other departments. In some cases, machines were dismantled or destroyed after the war to prevent their existence from becoming public knowledge. This secrecy had consequences. Many breakthroughs that could have accelerated civilian computing were delayed by decades. Scientists returned to academic life unable to explain what they had accomplished. Credit was fragmented or lost entirely. The public narrative of computer history would later overlook these wartime machines, even though they laid the foundation for everything that followed. By the final years of World War II, the outcome was clear. Machines had proven they could outperform humans in specific cognitive tasks. When speed mattered most, they did not replace human judgment, but they transformed what judgment could be based on. Decisions were now informed by calculations that were once impossible within a useful time frame. The war had forced humanity to cross a line it could never uncross. Once machines demonstrated their ability to process information faster than people, there was no returning to purely human calculation. The question was no longer whether such machines should exist. The only remaining question was what would happen when the war ended, and these machines no longer belonged solely to the battlefield. When the war finally began to wind down, the machines did not stop running. They simply fell silent. Some were powered off, some were dismantled, some were locked behind classified doors that would not open for decades, but the ideas behind them could not be erased. World War II ended with an uncomfortable truth. Machines had proven they could outperform humans in speed, consistency, and endurance when it came to processing information. Not creativity, not judgment, but raw calculation and logic, the kind of mental labor that modern civilization depended on more than anyone had ever admitted. Yet the public did not know this. Many of the most important wartime machines were still classified. Engineers who had spent years building them were legally forbidden from talking about what they had done. Entire breakthroughs vanished into secrecy. When the war ended, there was no grand announcement that the computer age had begun. There was no celebration. There was silence. Some scientists returned to universities and civilian laboratories with ideas they could not fully explain. Others joined government research projects that quietly continued the work under new names. What had once been justified by war was now reframed as research, forecasting, and automation. One of the biggest shifts was conceptual. During the war, machines were built for single purposes: code breaking, ballistics, fire control. After the war, researchers began asking a dangerous question. What if one machine could be adapted to perform many tasks instead of just one? This required a fundamental change. Instead of rewiring machines for each job, instructions themselves would need to become data, stored, modified, reused. This idea, born directly from the frustration of wartime rewiring, became the foundation of modern computing. The hardware improved rapidly. Vacuum tubes were replaced by more reliable components. Memory systems evolved. Machines became smaller, faster, and more flexible. What once filled entire rooms began shrinking first to cabinets, then to desks, and eventually to pockets. But the war's influence never faded. The language of computing retained its military roots. Terms like memory, logic, operations, processing, and control all reflected their origins in command and calculation. Early computers were often funded by governments, justified by defense needs, weather prediction, nuclear research, and logistics. Civilian uses came later. Even the workforce carried wartime DNA. Many early programmers were women who had served as human computers during the war. They understood the logic of machines intuitively because they had lived the process themselves. Yet many of them were written out of history as the field professionalized and became male dominated in the post war years. Perhaps the most haunting legacy was philosophical. Before World War II, machines were tools. They extended physical power. After World War II, machines extended mental power. They could outpace human thought in narrow domains. That realization unsettled people, even if they could not yet articulate why. Governments understood the implications immediately. Whoever controlled computing power would control intelligence, economics, and warfare. The Cold War accelerated development even further. Missiles, satellites, cryptography, and early networks all depended on machines that traced their lineage directly to wartime prototypes. The civilian world followed slowly at first. Businesses adopted computers to handle payroll, inventory, and accounting. Universities used them for research. The public barely noticed. These machines were expensive, inaccessible, and invisible to everyday life until they weren't. Over time, computers left government buildings and entered offices, then homes, then schools, then nearly every aspect of human existence: banking, medicine, communication, transportation, entertainment. All of it ran on principles, first proven under the pressure of global war. The irony is difficult to escape. The computer, often celebrated as a symbol of progress, convenience, and connection, was born from fear, urgency, and destruction. It was not designed to make life easier. It was designed to win a war faster than human minds could manage. And yet, once created, it could not be confined to that purpose. World War II did not just reshape borders or governments, it forced humanity to invent a new relationship with machines, a relationship where thinking itself could be delegated, accelerated, and eventually transformed. Every modern device, every digital signal, every automated decision carries that legacy. Not from curiosity, not from luxury, but from a moment in history when the world demanded answers faster than humans could give them. That is how the computer was truly born. Thank you for watching this story. If you enjoyed learning something new today, make sure to subscribe, like the video, and leave a comment telling us what you thought of this story.